This is Willie Kemp. This is the fourth lecture on anemia. This is conditions causing increased destruction, part 2. Then there'll be a part 3, and then the last 2 will be conditions from decreased production. There's my website, and with Dr. Hughes, we make up some questions for the USMLE review. We need to work on some more for that. There's my 2 Twitter things, which I haven't posted in quite some time, but I'll get back into it. And like I said, I'm a forensic pathologist, but I have a very strong interest in just general pathology and organ pathology, not traumatic pathology, and a very strong interest in teaching medical students. So here are the disclaimers. Please pause, read them. If you disagree with them, please do not watch this video. Third disclaimer, once again, pause, read it, look at it. If you disagree with it, do not watch the video. And the last one is if you want to know about my teaching style or how I approach things, please watch my introductory presentation. Not vital, of course. These are the list of references I've used for this. I've already talked about the utility of these and that, so I won't go into that again. So these are, once again, specific conditions leading to increased destruction of red blood cells. And once again, we'll start out with a question. So once again, pause, go through it. You don't have to know the answer. That's not the idea for it. The idea is that it guides you as you listen to the lecture, and it helps you key in on details and stuff like that, and you learn more by doing this. And then we'll go through at the end as we've been doing. So we'll talk about thalassemia. Once again, I broke the slides up. I tried to follow an organized fashion. So each one, as much as possible, I talk about the same topics in the same order for the conditions. Hopefully gives you an organized approach to it. So with thalassemia, it's kind of interesting because you have increased red blood cell destruction, but you also have decreased red blood cell production. So kind of 2. Demographics, this is found mostly in Asian, African, Mediterranean populations. And then once mechanisms, unlike with sickle cell, it's not a mutation, but it's actually decreased production of the entire globin chain. So either alpha in alpha thalassemia or beta in beta thalassemia. It's a codominant mutation. The point mutations are on chromosome 11 for beta thalassemia. And what it does is a mutation that leads to the abnormal splicing, abnormal translation, or abnormal transcription. And they use nomenclature for us. Beta with a 0 superscript is no beta globin chains are produced by that gene, and beta with a plus sign is that some are produced. So you can tell based upon how it's the mutation affects it, you're going to have a difference. And then in thalassemia, you have complete gene deletions, and there's 2 copies of each gene per chromosome on chromosome 16, so you actually lose 1 to 4 of those. And then pathology, there's not really anything specific to it. You can see target cells. We talk about target cells with liver disease and other things you can see target cells with. You can see marked poikilocytosis, which is something you can see with other ones as well. Marked anisocytosis. Poikilocytosis is variable shape. Anisocytosis is variable size, but they're not specific for thalassemia. So there's not really anything you're going to see that would tell you is for sure thalassemia. So beta thalassemia, there's a major, there's an intermediate, and there's a minor, depending upon what combination you have. So with beta thalassemia minor, one of the beta globin chains is normal. The other one is either they're not produced or it's produced in a decreased amount, the beta 0 or beta plus. And then you'll notice with beta thalassemia intermediate and beta thalassemia major, there's some of those that are overlap. And so, for example, it is possible for somebody to have a beta 0 and a beta plus and be either a major or intermediate. And it's different. In major, they have a very severe anemia, very serious condition, whereas intermediate, it's moderately severe, and it says they may not even necessarily require transfusion. They may be able to produce enough red blood cells. So you can see it would depend upon what exactly the mutation was. So here's 3 examples of beta thalassemia: major to the top left, intermediate to the right, and beta thal trait there. Now I'm not putting these up there with the idea that you can, that you can identify it from it, because you can see anisopoikilocytosis and other things as well. But this just gives you an idea of the severity of them, and you can see the red blood cell size, and that becomes a little bit more regular from major to intermediate to trait. The cells that you see there with the nuclei, those are obviously nucleated red blood cells. And so when your red blood cells are breaking down, they're going to be putting out the nucleated red blood cells quicker than what they should be And so you'll see an elevated number of them in the blood smear. So the pathology for beta thalassemia major, I thought I'd show it like this. So basically you have defective beta globin production, which is going to lead to an insufficient hemoglobin in red blood cells, but you also get unpaired alpha globin chains. So if you don't have beta globin, remember the hemoglobin is alpha and beta combined together. So if you don't have the beta globin, then you have these unpaired alpha chains, and these can actually be very damaging. What they can do is they can actually lead to apoptosis of those erythroid precursors, which leads to what we would call an ineffective erythropoiesis. And ineffective erythropoiesis, we also use this term when we talk about megaloblastic anemia, but basically it means that it's going on, but it's not effectively producing what we need. So you have decreased production. Because of that, the body is going to respond by thinking it needs more iron, and so you can actually get secondary hemochromatosis. The unpaired alpha chains, like I said, those are damaging, and so you get premature death of the red blood cells, an extravascular hemolysis, and then they're going to be removed in the spleen, so you get splenomegaly. So this was just trying to show you why, with beta thal major you get splenomegaly and secondary hemochromatosis. So this is just trying to show you the mechanisms by which those occur. Because to me, with pathology, there's a lot of stuff to memorize, but at the same time, if you can understand the mechanism or what's going on, it's a lot easier to remember it. I hope that helps. So another way to look at it too is with anemia of decreased production, increased destruction. Remember, thalassemia is one that crosses over you both. So because of that, you're going to get hyperplasia of the erythroid cells, which leads to bone marrow expansion. We talked about this with sickle cell anemia, same idea though. But you have decreased red blood cells, so the body tells it, make more red blood cells. It expands that bone marrow, and then the bone needs a change. Also, you can start producing red and white blood cells in alternate locations in the liver and spleen. Extramedullary hematopoiesis, and if you're producing red blood cells there, it's going to increase the size of the organ, so you get hepato and splenomegaly. Also, because you're turning over red blood cells so quickly, you're going to use up a lot of nutrients, and so that can lead to cachexia. And then you also, like I said, since the red blood cells are low, the body thinks, hey, I need more iron. It saves more iron, and you can develop a secondary hemochromatosis. Okay, so with alpha thalassemia, like I said, is complete deletion of one of the 4 genes. So you can basically have, at the bottom, they can be a silent carrier. The dash means they have no alpha globin chain, but they have 3, so they're asymptomatic. Alpha thalassemia trait, there are the combinations that you can see. It's some difference between Asians or blacks, and that one's also asymptomatic. Hemoglobin H disease, where you have 3 missing, but you still have 1 producing it, so they have a very severe anemia. And then if all 4 alpha chains are missing, they're going to have hydrops fetalis fetal demise. So with hydrops fetalis, that's where the fetus is hydropic, so very swollen. So with thalassemia, like sickle cell, it seems like not necessarily quite as bad. Obviously beta thal major and the alpha thalassemia, where you have all 4 genes gone, are actually very severe. But the other ones are more potentially survivable. But also there's some idea that this may cause some protection against Plasmodium falciparum and why it is in higher proportion. So one thing I learned about thalassemia from one of the hematopathologists told me is that, and it's in the books too, but he said you have a decrease in MCV that's out of proportion to the decrease in hemoglobin. So they have a relatively low MCV, but their hematocrit will still be relatively close to normal. So it says you can see an MCV of less than 75, but a hematocrit of greater than 30%. And this can be a real key to thalassemia. So remember, the unpaired alpha chains in beta thal are damaging to the cells, but excess beta globin chains and gamma globin chains in alpha thalassemia form stable tetramers. Beta 4 is hemoglobin H, and gamma 4 is hemoglobin Bart. And I always wish I was reversed, because it'd be a lot easier to remember that beta 4, B for beta, is hemoglobin Bart, but it's actually reverse of that. So hemoglobin Bart is the gamma, and that's what you see in kids. Hemoglobin H is what you see with the 4 beta chains. So like I said, so they don't damage the cell, so you get you don't get the ineffective erythropoiesis like you do in beta thalassemia. And so beta thalassemia major is manifest postnatal, and that's because of the hemoglobin F. Because remember, you have alpha and gamma in the fetal hemoglobin, and then it comes into alpha and beta. So for the first about 6 months, they're protected against it. Whereas with alpha thalassemia, right away, they're going to have problems because you need that alpha. So with the that in mind, since I mentioned hemoglobin F a couple times, this is from, I think, Bakerman's. Bakerman's also a really good book if you can find a copy of it. We had to get it in medical school, and I gave my version away, and I finally found another one on eBay or Amazon or something like that. But another really good book for going through for reading about lab tests and stuff like that. So this just shows you the level of hemoglobin F that you see in these diseases. I just put beta thalassemia, major, minor, sickle cell, and I put in there's a hereditary persistence of fetal hemoglobin. And then obviously if they're homozygote, they'll have 100%. So just put those in there just so you can see kind of the ones where you see an increased amount of hemoglobin F. It makes sense if you have a problem with your beta globin chain, that you wouldn't transition well from the hemoglobin F to the hemoglobin A, because you might as well just keep producing the gamma. Okay, so I live in Billings. So I first got to Billings one night. I was driving home and I saw a white deer. And I told my wife, and she goes, yeah, sure you did. And then a couple nights later, I was driving by, I saw it again. I driving down the road at night, took a picture with my cell phone. Please turn out. It did. And I showed her, see a white deer. And we saw it multiple times since then. And this is one time, it was in the winter. It was freezing. I can't believe my camera's still functioning, but I got a nice little picture of the white deer. So there's no Photoshop here or anything like that. That is a white deer. Okay, so moving away from thalassemia, we'll go to glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Once again, I tried to organize these slides in the same way. So with etiology anemia, you have increased red blood cell destruction, and it's going to be an extravascular hemolysis. Clinical history, what happens is they get hemolysis associated with exposure to oxidants. So one of the big oxidants you always learn about in tests is flavavines, but there are other ones, drugs. These include antimalarials, sulfonamides, aspirin. I was reading some vitamin K derivatives. Also, infections can do it as well too. So this can show up as something where you have a person who has some type of illness and then develops jaundice. Could be that brought out their G6PD. There's different variants of it. The A- variant is carried by about 10% of black males, and there's a Mediterranean variant found in the Middle East. What happens is they have inadequate production of GSH. So GSH helps reduce substances. So you don't have that, then oxidants do more damage. And I show something later on that, so I'm just giving you some background information. It's on the X chromosome, and it says there's about 400 variants of it, but most don't lead to a disease. So there's many different mutations of the gene, but only a couple actually lead to disease. The pathology, Heinz bodies, but these require a supervitamin stain, and these are basically precipitated and denatured hemoglobin, but you don't see them on regular smears. You have to have a special stain, but you do see the bite cells. So what this is kind of the way I look at the G6PD is it's kind of like the macrophage taking a bite out of the cell, getting the Heinz body or something like that, but you see the little bite cell. So this just shows the mechanism. So basically what happens is G6PD helps produce GSH, which is reduced glutathione. So reduced glutathione, what it does is it inactivates both exogenous and endogenous oxidants. So we produce hydrogen peroxide, different things like that. If you don't reduce those, you get oxidative injury. The oxidative injury leads to the Heinz bodies, which is the aggregates of oxidized hemoglobin, and that can lead to intravascular hemolysis, and it can also lead to impaired deformability through oxidative injury to the cell, and that can lead to extravascular hemolysis. Same thing as we talked about with hereditary spherocytosis, and the fact that it's not deformable when it goes through a spleen, and so it can be removed. Paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. This one, the etiology is an intravascular hemolysis, so it's a destruction of it. It's X-linked. It's a mutation of the piga gene, and the piga gene produces glycosylphosphatidylinositol, which is a membrane anchor for different proteins. And the proteins that are predominantly involved are down there, the CD55 decay accelerating factor, CD59, which is a membrane inhibitor of reactive lysis, and it inhibits C3 convertase. So the problem with this is basically that people with paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria can't limit the activity of their complement, and so they're prone to damage from the C5b9 membrane attack complex. There's testing for it. There's a positive sucrose hemolysis test. It says the positive HAMS test is most characteristic, and then they will actually have a decreased alkaline phosphatase, which can play a role in some differential diagnosis. I'll talk about this more with the leukemoid reaction. And then they said one interesting thing about this is that it's an acquired mutation, which they said is unique. So it also says that in paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, due to activation of complement, that thrombosis can occur. And these can often involve the portal or hepatic vein, so you could potentially get something like a Budd-Chiari syndrome. So here's the question. So once again, pause, answer it, and then continue the recording, and we'll go on. Prior to a cholecystectomy, a 23-year-old male has routine laboratory work obtained. Vital signs are normal, and review of systems does not identify anything specific. Preliminary laboratory testing reveals a hemoglobin of 10.2 grams per deciliter and an MCV of 69. Follow-up laboratory testing reveals the reticulocyte production index is 0.9, so not responding. Additionally, ferritin and methylmalonic acid are within normal range. Of the following, what is the most likely diagnosis? So this is thalassemia. So he's asymptomatic. He has a low hemoglobin, but the MCV is not that bad. Sorry, a low MCV, but the hematocrit is not that bad, it'd be about 30%. So the MCV is really decreased out of proportion to the level of hemoglobin, which is characteristic for the thalassemia. And then the other ones are ruled out by other things there. So there's the explanation for it when I wrote the question. So once again, I would suggest using reflection. Think back, what are 5 things I learned from this lecture? I'm hoping you learned 5 things. And like I said, this is a very powerful tool for helping cement the material in your mind and remembering it. So I'm not quite certain where this is from. I'm from the northwest corner of Montana, from Libby, Montana. My mom still lives up there. I'll try and go up and visit her when I can. And I think it was on one of my trips up there. But just for some reason, I think I actually have some of my pictures with Canadian geese that were there, and I was probably taking pictures of them too, but just kind of like the scenery. So anyway, I hope this has helped you understand anemia, and thank you.